All right, hello everyone. Today we're looking at Nazi propaganda with the objective of finding out what this propaganda looked like and what did it accomplish. Now, those of you who are familiar with history in Nazi Germany, this will be a very familiar face to you. Those of you who aren't familiar with the history yet, this is Joseph Goebbels, and he was in charge of the Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. And he's going to be a key figure that we're going to be exploring today when we're looking at the creation of propaganda and the intended outcomes that propaganda would have. Right, so we've got three keywords to look at. The first is propaganda, and this is when information is shared with the public in a misleading nature. And I know we don't use the B word in history, but we'll use it today to say that propaganda is always biased because it has a particular point it is trying to share. And propaganda will leave out specific points or information for the public in an attempt to share only the information that that particular group wants people to see. Now, censorship is when there's limitations set on what the press and the media and even the public are allowed to say and how they're allowed to communicate. The Nazis were masters of censorship. They limited what newspapers were allowed to publish. They burned and got rid of books in libraries that they didn't want people to see. And they also took control over newspapers and books, specifically school textbooks, to make sure only Nazi values were being shared with children. And Joseph Goebbels, you'll notice sometimes his name is spelled Josef or with a PH at the end. Both are okay for us to use. He was a minister of propaganda and public enlightenment as of 1933 until 1945. And here he is, very nice picture, of course, of Mr. Joseph Goebbels. Something we need to know about him is he didn't serve in the First World War because he had a disability known as a clubfoot. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that in our bonus facts today. But he became the district administrator for the Nazis, and Hitler realized quite early on he's really good at organization. He's really good at sharing messages with people. Initially, Joseph Goebbels was trying to be the leader of the Nazi Party, but once he heard Hitler speak, he gladly took a step back and allowed Hitler to take that role instead of him. In doing so, he was placed in charge of all German propaganda, and he worked very closely with Hitler and his senior Nazi staff. Hitler was very well known to offer Joseph Goebbels the job of being the Chancellor of Germany if Hitler were to no longer be able to fill that position. Something that not many people know about him is on the 1st of May 1945, he actually poisoned his 6 children, and then he and his wife took their own lives. And this was because the Russians were coming into Berlin and were going to potentially capture the Goebbels family. Joseph Goebbels knew that if he was captured by the Russians, he would be tortured. So he decided that if any of his members of his family were captured, they would certainly be put into a camp. And he knew better than anybody else what would happen if his children were put into a concentration camp. So let's take a look at some quotes from Joseph Goebbels. Read them, see if there's any common trends. What's he trying to do to Germans, and what does he actually think of the German public? And the first one he says is, if you tell a lie, tell a big one. A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. The truth is the greatest enemy of the state. There is no need for propaganda to be rich in intellectual content, and you have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. So let's start off with the first one. If you tell a lie, tell a big one. And Joseph Goebbels means that if you're going to tell something that is false, make sure it's so big that people won't suspect it's untrue. There's no way that someone would try to tell a lie that big if it's not actually real. A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. This was the doctrine of Nazi propaganda, is if you repeat something over and over and over, people will eventually come to believe it. The truth is the greatest enemy of the state. The Nazis needed to conceal a lot of truths, if you will, and they had to make sure that only the Nazi truth was the one being shared with the general public. There's no need for propaganda to be rich in intellectual content. It means propaganda needs to be simple. It needs to be easy to understand. When you look at a propaganda poster, you don't want it to ask you a question. It needs to provide you with an answer. And the last, if you have nothing to fear, then you have nothing to hide. This suggests that anybody who is trying to hide something should be afraid, specifically of the Nazis and the Gestapo. So the Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. It was formed in 1933 and it was led by this man here, Joseph Goebbels. And oftentimes we think of Hitler as being the one making all the speeches, but Joseph Goebbels made his fair share of speeches as well. Now, the propaganda ministry spent close to 200 million pounds, and that's in terms of modern money. It was about 86 million back in the 1940s, every year on propaganda. And that's posters, that's radio adverts, movies and cinema adverts. Before every time you watched a movie in the cinema, there'd be a short newsreel before, kind of like the previews that we see today. So they'd spend money on those. Now, the propaganda ministry had 7 different divisions, and this was to cover all aspects of life. So, Division 1 was for the legal system and administration. Division 2 was all about rallies, public health, youth, race. Division 3 was broadcasting. Division 4 was about national and foreign press. So, the national press was anything within Germany itself, and the foreign press were the stories the Nazis were allowing the rest of the world to read. Division 5 was film and film censorship, and that was something Joseph Goebbels was very involved in. He was a very strong film critic by nature, as well as art, music, and theater. And Division 7 was protection against counter propaganda, both foreign and domestic. And that was to try to create posters that would refute or diminish the importance of British propaganda or American propaganda. So here we have one of his more famous quotes where he says, propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will. Another way we can say this is propaganda works best when those who are being tricked or fooled are confident that they are acting on their own free will. So propaganda works best if you don't realize you're being fooled, if you're doing that thing the propaganda is suggesting without even thinking about it. So it was important for Germans to believe in the Nazi ideals, and they didn't just have to see them, they needed to believe them and believe they were correct. Nazi propaganda appeared everywhere, shops, public transport, cinemas, radio, newspapers, and schools. And that word we learned last lesson, Gleichschaltung, Nazification. The Nazis appeared to be everywhere. And there were also punishments. For example, if you told an anti-Nazi joke, you could be handed a prison sentence of up to 5 years in jail. And our German girl. You can look at the emotion, the way that they're appearing to be. So what are some of the common themes we see? Well, we definitely have males in roles of authority and females in roles of inferiority. There's a lot of happiness, a lot of strength, a lot of independence, perseverance. The message shared, you know, boy fights for the German people. This is a perfect girl. The worker has awoken to National Socialism. They're very succinct messages being shared. We see a lot of red, white, and black. Oddly enough, these are the colors used on the Nazi flag. And red is a really aggressive color. The inside of casinos. A casino operates by getting people to gamble and bet money. And oftentimes the interior of casinos will have red carpeting or red walls. The color red is an aggressive color. And casinos believe that if you feel more aggressive, you're more willing to take risks and gamble more of your money. And the messages being shared, these propaganda posters, they don't ask questions, they provide answers. They provide the answer that soldiers are strong and civilians must support the army either by financial donations or by signing up to join the fight. This is a famous propaganda poster. It's quite simple. It just has one answer on it. That answer, of course, is Hitler. But if you would like to pause your screen in a moment and try a little experiment. Now, if you're on a laptop, this will be a little bit easier, or a desktop computer. It will work on your phone. But what you need to do is pause the video and make eye contact with Hitler. And in doing so, you need to move your head to the left and to the right of your screen. And don't break eye contact with Hitler. Make sure you're looking right into his eyes. If you want to take a step back from your screen, take a few steps to the left and right, all the while maintaining eye contact, you'll see that something happens with this image. Now, this takes place because of the clever shading. It's not an animated image in any way. But this is a very effective type of propaganda poster. It makes people feel as though Hitler is watching them everywhere they go. Now, we know a key word this would remind us of, and it's that word that translates into Nazification. The word we're looking for is, of course, I shall tongue. Now, time for bonus facts. Joseph Goebbels was really honest. He often shared this information with Germans, and he said if you repeat a lie enough, people will come to believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, essentially, that anyone who believes my propaganda is an idiot. Nazi propaganda persecuted the disabled, and Joseph Goebbels himself had a disability. So we did mention earlier that he had a club foot. This is when his right foot was slightly turned inwards. It was a bit shorter and a bit thicker than his left, and this left him unable to serve in the First World War. Very few images exist showing his club foot, but we do have an image here for you to see that the impact it had, he walked with a little bit of a limp. It's a bit odd that his propaganda was against people with disabilities when he himself had a disability. The propaganda ministry was the most efficient department in the Nazi regime. Hitler was always happy with the success of the propaganda ministry, and they were very successful. An example here on the right-hand side is an image showing censorship. So all these people have come down to a meeting held by the Nazis where they are burning specific books, mainly by Jewish authors or any books that would denounce any of the Nazis' ideals, and they're willingly throwing their property onto this fire. And we can actually see in the air above people still throwing books from the crowd to be burned. So that's it for today. Have a look on Show My Homework for the quiz and any other tasks set by your teacher.